Welcome back to the deep dive. Today, we're taking a really monumental journey into the economic engine and, well, the social bedrock of one of the world's largest nations, Indian agriculture.
It really is central, isn't it?
Absolutely. The system we're diving into is incredibly complex. It contributes, about 16% of the national GDP?
That's right.
Yet, it shoulders the huge responsibility of supporting a staggering 46.1% of the entire population. I mean, the stakes here aren't just economic, they feel almost existential.
It is the ultimate tightrope walk, as you say. Our sources today, and we've got quite a mix, policy analysis, economic surveys, environmental research, they all highlight this persistent tension.
Which is?
How does a government simultaneously guarantee affordable food for, over a billion consumers, while also ensuring sustainable profits and resilience for millions of small, often very vulnerable farmers? It's a huge balancing act.
Exactly.
Right.
And that's our mission today, really. We want to give you the fast track to understanding this landscape. We're aiming to strip away some of the bureaucratic noise and extract the most vital nuggets of knowledge.
Right. Focusing on the key policy pivots.
Yeah, things like the really contentious debates over price floors, MSP, the massive infrastructure of food security, right through to the emerging tech roadmap, and of course the existential threat posed by climate change.
Think of this as your personalized briefing on the future of farming in India. We'll focus on the interplay between, say, the economics right at the farm gate and the high-tech solutions that are now being deployed to try and secure the nation's diet and hopefully improve farmer livelihoods.
Okay, let's unpack this, starting with maybe the single most discussed and frankly debated policy mechanism, the minimum support price, or MSP.
MSP.
In essence, this is the government's promise, right? A guaranteed floor price.
That's the idea. It's the floor price at which a farmer can sell certain essential commodities, mostly rice and wheat historically, to state agencies like the Food Corporation of India, the FCI.
It sounds like a perfect safety net on paper, but what's fascinating, and let's be honest, deeply political, is how they actually set this price, the formula itself.
Right. Currently, the MSP is calculated by the Commission for Agricultural Costs and Prices, CACP, and then it needs approval from the Cabinet Committee on Economic Affairs. The standing formula, as it's often quoted, is A2 plus FL times 1.5.
Okay, can you break down those cost components for us? What does A2 plus FL actually capture?
Sure. A2 is basically the direct cash cost. Think of it as the actual money paid out by the farmer for things like seeds, fertilizers, pesticides, fuel, maybe hired labor.
Okay, the tangible costs.
Exactly. And FL stands for family labor. This is the imputed value. So an estimated value of the labor contributed by the farmer and their family members. It's essentially trying to treat family time as a paid input.
Yeah, and the 1.5 multiplier.
The goal there is to ensure a 50% margin over those paid out costs and the imputed family labor. That's the theory.
But here's where the core political tension really seems to lie, isn't it? There's this competing formula.
Yes, the one farmers and various expert committees have long advocated for. The C2 plus 50% formula.
Why is that calculation such a huge sticking point? What does C2 include that A2 plus FL doesn't?
Well, because C2 is far more comprehensive. It includes everything in A2 and FL, but crucially, it adds in two major non-cash economic costs.
Which are?
The imputed rent on the land the farmer owns and the imputed interest on the capital they own, like machinery, tractors, that sort of thing.
So the opportunity cost.
Exactly. Farmers argue, quite reasonably, that their land and machinery have opportunity costs. If they weren't farming the land, they could potentially rent it out, right? Or use the capital tied up in machinery elsewhere. So C2 represents arguably the true economic cost of production.
If C2 represents the true economic cost, why does the government persistently stick with the less comprehensive A2 plus FL formula? It seems like a constant point of friction.
Well, the sources make it pretty clear. The primary hurdle is fiscal. It's about the money.
The cost to the government.
Exactly. Moving to a C2-based MSP would trigger a really significant rise in that floor price. We're talking massive financial implications. There's a high risk of market distortion, too. The government worries about the potential size of the procurement bill and also the knock-on effects on inflation for consumers and maybe even export competitiveness.
Okay, so even with the current lower A2 plus FL rate, the MSP system has issues. You mentioned it starts with who actually benefits. It sounds universal, but the reality is quite different.
It's shockingly narrow, which really undermines its stated goal as a nationwide safety net. Our research shows that only about 6% of farmers actually benefit directly from MSP procurement.
Only 6%. That's tiny.
It is. And furthermore, the implementation is heavily concentrated. Geographically, it's mainly centered in Punjab and Haryana. And crop-wise, it's overwhelmingly focused on rice and wheat.
So even though they list more crops.
They technically cover about 23 crops, yes.
Yeah.
But the actual procurement, the buying, really only impacts about 28% of the total agricultural output value. It's very skewed.
And that concentration, that skew, leads directly to one of the most serious long-term consequences, doesn't it? The environmental distortion.
Absolutely. When the state effectively guarantees a good price for specific crops, particularly rice and wheat, it fundamentally influences what farmers choose to grow. It creates a powerful incentive.
So grow what the government buys reliably.
Pretty much. The guaranteed price for rice, for example, incentivizes farmers, even in non-traditional, often quite arid or semi-arid regions, to plant it, even though rice is one of the most water-intensive crops on the planet.
And that's how you end up with things like sugarcane in water-stressed areas.
Precisely. Or paddy being grown using rapidly depleting groundwater tables in places like Punjab. It actively discourages crop diversification into less water-intensive or more climate-resilient crops. It leads to severe resource inefficiency and, as you said, groundwater depletion. It's a major environmental concern linked directly to the policy.
Okay, let's address the elephant in the room then. The proposal, the demand to legalize MSP for all 23 covered crops. What does our source material suggest about the potential consequences if this were mandated, especially using that higher C2 formula?
Look, the sources are pretty unequivocal on this. The risk is enormous. Some even suggest it borders on potential market collapse.
How so?
If private players, traders, companies were legally forced to buy produce above a highly inflated MSP, particularly one based on C2, well, they might simply choose not to buy at all. Or they couldn't afford to.
Meaning the government has to buy everything.
Effectively, yes. The entire burden of procurement and basically ensuring market stability would fall entirely onto the state. The cost could place a completely unsustainable fiscal burden on state finances. It's a massive potential liability.
You hear about mechanisms like price deficiency payments, PDP, as a possible way to manage this fiscal risk. How would that work?
Right. PDP is one proposed alternative. The idea is instead of the government physically buying all the crop, the state would pay the farmer the deficiency between the lower market price they actually get and the guaranteed MSP.
So a direct payment to the farmer.
Yes. It avoids the government having to handle physical storage and logistics, which is a plus. However, if the mandated MSP is set very high, like with C2, and the market price is consistently much lower, the government would still be issuing massive, potentially endless checks to cover that gap.
So the fiscal drain remains.
It absolutely remains. It's just a direct transfer instead of a procurement cost. Some reports estimate it could potentially double the existing agricultural subsidy bill, which is already huge. It doesn't solve the fundamental cost issue if the MSP is set too high.
So if MSP, especially legalized MSP, is fraught with these issues, we need solutions that support farm income without distorting prices and the environment so much. What's the consensus policy shift that seems to be emerging?
The intellectual shift, I think, is clear.
Yeah.
We need to try and decouple farmer welfare from the specific price of a specific crop at a specific time.
Move away from price support.
Exactly. The focus has to shift much more aggressively toward things like direct income support and robust insurance mechanisms.
Like PM Kisan?
Precisely. Schemes like PM Kisan, which provides direct decoupled income support, basically cash transfers unrelated to what they grow, are key. And also PM Fasal Bima Yoshana, PM FBY, which offers crop insurance against yield loss due to weather or pests.
So supporting the farmer's livelihood directly, regardless of whether the state buys their grain.
That's the goal, to provide a safety net that isn't tied directly to production incentives for specific crops.
And beyond just financial payouts, what about interventions to actually boost the efficiency of farming itself?
That's the other crucial pillar, absolutely. What are often called non-price interventions. This means sustained, heavy public investment in things like agricultural research and development.
Developing better seeds, techniques.
Yes, developing high-yield varieties, HYVs, tailored for different agroclimatic zones, strengthening extension services so farmers actually learn about and adopt these innovations, promoting farm mechanization to improve productivity and reduce drudgery.
The idea being to make farming itself more efficient and less costly.
Exactly. So the farmer is less reliant on the government having to guarantee an artificially high price floor just to make ends meet. It's about improving the fundamentals of the farm operation. Hashtag 1.2, the root causes and impacts of agrarian distress.
Okay, let's transition now to the core issue that really drives all these policies. The phenomenon of agrarian distress. Our sources help us define this crisis by distinguishing between sort of the big picture structural issues, the macro level, and the very immediate human level impacts the micro issues.
That's a useful distinction. The macro distress is really about structural inefficiency. You have the situation where, as you mentioned earlier, 43% of the workforce is engaged in agriculture, but it's only contributing about 18% of the national GDP.
A huge number of people generating relatively little value per person.
Exactly. It implies deep, systemic low per capita productivity. Compounding this are things like consistently high input costs, fertilizer, seeds, fuel, and the pervasive inadequacy of rural infrastructure. Think about roads, reliable power, cold storage, all often lacking.
And the micro distress is what we see in the headlines more often, isn't it? The profound human cost.
Precisely. It's the reliance on recurring loan waivers, the tragic phenomenon of farmer suicides, and the steady stream of migration away from rural areas as farming becomes untenable for many.
Our sources suggest these distress factors span the entire agricultural cycle right from the beginning.
Yes, right from the input stage. You see the debilitating effects of highly fragmented landholdings. The average farm size in India is tiny, which makes adopting modern mechanization very difficult and inefficient.
And irrigation.
Still a major constraint. Only about 55% of the net sown area is irrigated. That leaves a huge portion highly vulnerable to the whims of the monsoon. On top of that, access to formal credit, loans from banks, is often limited, especially for small and marginal farmers. This forces many into the hands of informal moneylenders who charge exorbitant interest rates.
Okay, so that's before they even plant. What about during the actual production stage? The risks multiply them, primarily due to weather, I imagine.
Absolutely. As we said, 2/3 of India's farmland is still rain-fed. It's entirely dependent on a monsoon that, due to climate change, is becoming increasingly erratic and unpredictable. Beyond just rainfall, farmers face constant threats from weed infestations, pest attacks, and the increasing frequency of natural disasters like droughts, floods, or hailstorms.
And then, even if they manage to get a crop, post-production, they face market volatility. You mentioned the cobweb phenomenon earlier. Can you explain that a bit more?
Yes, the cobweb phenomenon is a critical concept for understanding agricultural markets, especially for non-MSP crops.
Yeah.
It happens because individual farmers often make planting decisions based on the price of the crop last season.
So reactive pricing.
Exactly. If onion prices were really high this year, guess what? Many farmers will plant onions next year hoping to cash in. This leads to an immense glut. Supply skyrockets and the price crashes, causing heavy losses for those farmers.
And the year after that?
The year after that, everyone avoids onions because they got burnt. This causes a shortage, prices spike again, and the cycle repeats. It's a self-perpetuating boom and bust cycle, driven by the time lag between the planting decision and the actual harvest. It creates massive price instability for farmers.
And all this instability, the debt from input costs, the structural inefficiencies, it coalesces into that stark human cost we talked about. The data on farmer suicides is a really chilling indicator of the depth of this crisis.
It is truly sobering, and we have to acknowledge the weight of these figures. The National Crime Records Bureau, NCRB, data from 2022 recorded 11,290 suicides specifically within the farming sector. That represents about 6.6% of all suicides recorded nationally that year.
And it's not evenly spread across the country, is it?
No, definitely not. There are specific regional belts where this tragedy is disproportionately concentrated. Areas like Vidarbha and Maharashtra, parts of North Karnataka regions, often characterized by chronic water scarcity and very high levels of farmer indebtedness.
And that indebtedness seems to be the direct link to the political and economic tool that gets used repeatedly, loan waivers. Just how deep is that debt hole for agricultural households?
According to a key survey by NABARD, the National Bank for Agriculture and Rural Development, a shocking 52% of agricultural households in India are currently in debt. Half of them.
Wow. Half.
Yes, and this immense pressure inevitably leads to repeated political calls for state intervention, which brings us squarely into the loan waiver debate.
Okay, let's try and lay out the arguments. What are the key points made in favor of loan waivers? They're often presented as a necessary, almost moral lifeline.
The primary argument in favor is that they provide immediate relief to distressed farmers. They can clear non-performing assets, NPAs, from the books of banks, particularly commercial and regional rural banks, which allows the credit cycle to potentially restart. There's also an argument about ensuring food security by keeping farmers, even indebted ones, in production.
And a moral obligation.
Yes. fulfilling a perceived moral obligation of the state to protect its primary food producers, especially in times of crisis. And the scale of this intervention is huge. Our sources, citing SBI research, calculated that between 2014 and 2021 alone, various state governments waived over 2.53 lakh crore in farm loans. That is a colossal amount of capital injected.
2.5 lakh crore. But the arguments against loan waivers suggest that while they offer this temporary financial relief, they fundamentally undermine the long-term health of the entire rural credit system.
They absolutely do. This is the core criticism. Waivers create what economists call a profound moral hazard. They essentially reward non-repayment and can incentivize farmers to strategically default on loans in the expectation that another waiver will eventually be announced.
It damages the credit culture.
Completely. It erodes the willingness to repay loans, making banks more hesitant to lend in the future or forcing them to charge higher interest rates to cover the perceived risk. More critically, loan waivers are often seen as just a band-aid. They don't address the root causes of the distress.
Like lack of access to reliable credit in the first place.
Exactly. They often fail to address the lack of institutional credit for tenant farmers or landless laborers who might be deeply indebted to informal moneylenders not covered by the waiver. They also suffer from inclusion and exclusion errors, sometimes benefiting less needy farmers while missing the most vulnerable. And of course, they derail state fiscal consolidation efforts by placing a sudden, unforeseen burden on the budget.
So the consensus among many economists
Is that this is often a politically expedient but economically damaging cycle. It distracts from the vital, harder structural reforms required, like improving irrigation, infrastructure, market access, and maybe even regulating those non-institutional moneylenders who charge usurious rates.
Okay, let's shift our focus now. We've talked about the farmers' distress, but let's look at the other side of the coin. The massive logistical and policy challenge of ensuring national food security. Feeding over 1 billion people. Our sources often structure this around the FAO's widely accepted 4 pillars.
Yes, it's a very useful framework to get your head around the different policy levers involved. The first pillar is availability. This is about ensuring there's enough food physically present in the country. Policies like MSP, which encourages production, and maintaining adequate national buffer stocks of grains contribute here.
Okay, availability. What's next?
Second is affordability. Just having food isn't enough if people can't afford it. This is where the public distribution system, PDS, comes in, providing subsidized grains, primarily under the umbrella of the National Food Security Act, the NFSA. Third is nutrition. Food security isn't just about calories, it's about the right kind of food. Targeted programs like the Integrated Child Development Scheme, ICDS, for young children and pregnant mothers, and the Midday Meal Scheme in schools aim to address nutritional needs.
And the final pillar.
Stability. This is about ensuring consistent access to food over time, cushioning the nation against shocks like droughts, floods, or even economic crises. Effective storage and robust buffer stock management are key to stability.
Right. Now, the centerpiece of that affordability strategy, as you mentioned, is the National Food Security Act, NFSA, of 2013. Why was the enactment of the NFSA considered such a truly pivotal moment in Indian policy history?
Because it fundamentally shifted the paradigm. It moved food assistance away from being a discretionary welfare program, something the government could do, and established access to subsidized food as a legal right for a large portion of the population.
A legal entitlement.
Exactly. This mandates the government to provide subsidized food grains to 67% of the total population.
Yeah.
The split is roughly 75% coverage in rural areas and 50% in urban areas. By sheer scale, it's arguably the world's largest subsidized food program.
And the level of subsidy provided is immense, isn't it?
It really is. Under the Acts, beneficiaries are entitled to receive food grains at very low central issue prices, CIP. Rice is provided at just €3 per kilogram, wheat at 2 per kilogram, and coarse grains like millet at €1 per kilogram. These prices have remained fixed for years.
And it integrates other schemes, too.
Yes, the NFSA provides the overarching legal framework for several other critical social safety nets. It integrates coverage for pregnant women and lactating mothers through the Maternity Benefit Scheme. And it ensures nutritional support for children through the ICDS Anganwadis and the Midday Meal Scheme in schools. It ties these different strands together.
Now, while the NFSA is clearly monumental in its scope and intent, our deep dive suggests there are some critical challenges and maybe a learning curve associated with managing an operation of this sheer magnitude.
Definitely. One of the primary intellectual critiques you often hear is about the NFSA's focus. It's been described as somewhat myopic, prioritizing the quantity of subsidized staple grains, primarily rice and wheat, over comprehensive nutritional security.
So filling bellies, but not necessarily providing a balanced diet.
That's the concern. While it's incredibly effective at preventing outright hunger and ensuring basic calorie intake, it doesn't inherently solve the problem of malnutrition or micronutrient deficiencies, because things like pulses, millets, edible oils, which are crucial for nutrition, are often not covered or not subsidized to the same extent.
And the fiscal side must be staggering. Just managing these subsidies must incur an enormous cost, even before considering emergency interventions like during the pandemic.
Oh, the fiscal burden is immense. If you look at the extraordinary expenditure during COVID on targeted schemes like the Pradhan Mantri Garib Kalyan Yojana, PMGKAY, which provided additional free grains, that program alone accounted for something like 6.6% of the entire national budget in 2022-23.
6.6% just on that one scheme.
Just on that one temporary food security extension. To put that figure into perspective, it often costs more than the combined central budgetary allocation for crucial sectors like health and education in many years. So there's a clear trade-off in terms of government expenditure priorities.
We also see some federal friction arising from the NFSA structure, don't we? Especially with states that historically had more expansive welfare systems.
That's right. Some states, like Tamil Nadu or Kerala, traditionally operated a near-universal public distribution system, PDS, covering almost everyone. The NFSA, however, sets a national coverage limit of 67% of the population, and the central government's subsidy contribution is restricted to that limit.
So if those states want to continue covering more people,
they have to bear the full additional cost themselves from their own state budgets. This creates a kind of financial disincentive for states to maintain or expand universal coverage beyond the centrally mandated level. It's a point of ongoing discussion between the center and some states. Hashtag 2.2 Systemic Challenges in the Public Distribution System, PDS.
Okay, so the PDS is the physical machinery that actually delivers on the NFSA's promise. But this colossal logistical machine, from the procurement point right down to the local fair price shop, FPS, has historically been plagued by systemic challenges.
Yes, we can trace these issues right back to the very beginning, the procurement stage. The system largely relies on open-ended procurement, particularly for rice and wheat, driven by the MSD policy. This means the government effectively promises to buy almost all the rice and wheat that farmers offer at the MSP price,
leading to huge stockpiles.
Exactly. It frequently leads to buffer stocks reaching levels that are double, sometimes even more, than the prescribed norms needed for food security and stability. This excess stock ties up a vast amount of capital, requires massive storage and maintenance efforts, and, as we discussed earlier, further reinforces that skewed cropping pattern favoring rice and wheat over other crops.
And when you have these massive excess stocks, storage itself and the potential for wastage becomes a colossal problem.
Absolutely. Our notes highlight this as a critical vulnerability. Significant quantities of food grains have historically been reported lost or damaged due to unscientific storage methods. Think of grains stored out in the open on plinths, covered only by tarps, vulnerable to rain, pests, rodents, and also due to simply inadequate storage infrastructure capacity.
This is where the Shantakumar Committee recommendations from 2015 were so important, weren't they? Addressing this storage crisis.
Yes, the Shantakumar Committee SKC report was pivotal. It pushed hard for modernizing the entire storage and procurement system.
What were some of its key recommendations?
Well, they recommended setting a much stricter buffer norm, say, around 61 million metric tons, MMT, was suggested, and crucially, automatically liquidating any stock above that norm through open market sales or exports. The idea was to prevent this perpetual accumulation of excess grain.
And on the infrastructure side?
They strongly advocated for replacing old, dilapidated godowns with modern steel silos, preferably located near the main procurement mandis. They pushed for using the public-private partnership, PPP model, to finance and manage these silos. And they also recommended outsourcing large-scale grain storage operations to professional agencies like the Central Warehousing Corporation, CWC, or state warehousing corporations to bring in more efficiency and accountability.
Storage is one major issue. But perhaps the most legendary problem associated with the PDS historically has been leakage and diversion. The subsidized grain not reaching the intended beneficiaries.
Yes, leakage was rampant for decades. The Shantakumar Committee itself estimated that diversion could be as high as 46% of the subsidized grain meant for the PDS.
Yeah.
46%.
That's almost half. How does that happen?
It happens through several methods. You had the issue of ghost cards, fake beneficiary identity documents used to claim grain that didn't exist. There was overt corruption by officials involved in transport and storage, and perhaps most commonly, diversion by the fair price shop owners themselves, who might illegally sell the subsidized grain into the open black market for a much higher profit.
And this doesn't just cost the government money.
No, it also directly harms the poor by creating artificial scarcity of subsidized grains in certain areas, and it can contribute to local market inflation for essential food items. It was a massive drain and a source of corruption.
It sounds like an almost intractable problem, but recent years seem to show that digital modernization is finally starting to plug many of these holes.
Technology really is the game changer here. We're seeing significant infrastructure reforms moving rapidly toward improving efficiency and transparency. One key development is the deployment of the hub-and-spoke silo model.
How does that work?
You have large hub silos strategically located, often with direct railway sidings for rapid, high-volume grain transfer across long distances. Then you have smaller regional spoke silos connected by road networks, serving local distribution needs. This hub-and-spoke system optimizes the logistics and reduces handling losses.
And the shift to digital tools seems to be tackling the core problems of tracking ownership and preventing fraudulent claims.
Precisely. A major innovation is the introduction of ENWRs. That's electronic negotiable warehouse receipts. Think of this like a digital stock certificate or a deed for grain stored in accredited warehouses.
So it proves ownership digitally.
Exactly. It's a dematerialized, secure certificate that legally proves ownership of a specific quantity and quality of grain. And crucially, it can be traded online, used as collateral for loans, increasing liquidity and transparency in the system.
And linking this with other digital initiatives.
Yes, when you couple ENWRs with end-to-end computerization of the entire PDS supply chain, biometric identification of beneficiaries at the fair price shop using Aadhaar authentication, and GPS tracking enabled on trucks transporting the grain well, the ability to track practically every kilogram of grain in real time from procurement to final distribution is dramatically reducing the scope for diversion and leakage. It's making a huge difference.
Okay, so if the traditional MSP system for staples like rice and wheat has created these structural challenges, the future growth engine for rural income seems to be clearly shifting towards the allied sectors. The data suggests this shift is already well underway, doesn't it?
The shift is undeniable, and the numbers are quite compelling. If you look at the compound annual growth rate, the CAGR, for the period from FY15 to FY23, it really tells a story of diversification.
What are the standout sectors?
Fisheries grew by a very impressive 13.67% annually during that period, and the livestock sector grew by nearly 13%, 12.99% CAGR.
That's significantly faster than traditional crop agriculture, right?
Much faster. And this high growth means that the contribution of these allied sectors, livestock, fisheries, forestry, to the overall gross value added, GVA, of agriculture and allied activities has risen substantially. It increased from about 24.38% to over 30.23% in that period. So nearly a third of the value is now coming from these allied activities.
Let's delve a bit deeper into the livestock sector, particularly dairy. It seems immense, not just in terms of GVA, but also in its social reach.
The sheer scale is sometimes hard to grasp. Livestock, especially dairy, directly employs an estimated 80 million farmers, many of them smallholders. Economically, this sector is vital for income diversification. For the average agricultural household, livestock contributes over 10% of their total income.
And even more for disadvantaged groups.
Yes, that's a key point. For the most disadvantaged and marginalized groups, including landless laborers and small farmers, that income contribution from livestock jumps significantly to around 26% or even higher. It's a crucial source of supplementary income and resilience.
And this sector is also heavily linked to a significant social trend we hear a lot about.
Yes, the trend towards the feminization of agriculture. Livestock farming, especially dairy activities like milking and cattle care, is very labor-intensive, but often managed and operated primarily by women within rural households.
Providing them with income streams.
Exactly. It provides them with critical, often steady, income streams and can contribute significantly to greater financial independence and decision-making power within the household. However, it's not without challenges.
Such as?
Productivity remains a major issue. For example, average milk yield per animal in India is still only about 50% of the global average. Disease management is also difficult and costly, as we saw with recent outbreaks of lumpy skin disease in cattle. And there are growing concerns about the environmental footprint, particularly greenhouse gas, GHG emissions from livestock, mainly methane.
Okay, moving from livestock to horticulture, fruits, vegetables, flowers, spices. This also presents a similar high-growth, high-value alternative to the standard rice wheat cultivation cycle.
It absolutely does. And the profitability comparison is really eye-opening. This is a major reason why policymakers are aggressively pushing for diversification into horticulture.
How much more profitable is it?
On average, horticulture offers farmers potential returns of around 4.67 lakh per hectare. Compare that to the typical 30,000 to 40,000 per hectare you might see from rice or wheat cultivation. It's an order of magnitude higher.
Wow, that's a huge difference.
It is. And beyond just the income potential, horticulture offers other key benefits. Risk diversification for farmers, crucial nutritional security for the population by providing varied micronutrients, and it can help reduce the national import burden for certain high-value fruits and vegetables.
But compared to staple grains, high-value horticulture crops seem to face a distinct set of structural issues, especially after the crop is harvested.
Absolutely. The challenges are different. Structurally, most horticultural crops lack the MSP safety net that staples have. Cultivation often involves long gestation periods and harvest cycles, especially for fruit orchards, meaning farmers wait longer for returns. Many orchards are also old and need replanting with newer varieties.
And post-production?
Post-production challenges are dominated by one major factor: perishability. Fruits and vegetables spoil quickly. Without adequate cold storage facilities, refrigerated transportation networks, the whole cold chain infrastructure, huge portions of the harvest can be lost before reaching the market.
And exporting is tougher too.
Much tougher. Exporting horticulture is extremely sensitive to sanitary and phytosanitary SPS barriers imposed by importing countries. These are strict regulations related to pests, diseases, and chemical residues. Meeting these demands, impeccable quality control and traceability, far stricter than for non-perishable staples. Schemes like the Mission for Integrated Development for Horticulture, MIDH, are crucial for trying to bridge these critical gaps in inputs, infrastructure, and market linkages.
So, in essence, the overall rationale for crop diversification, moving into livestock, horticulture, etc., is that it's not just a sort of nice to have. It's becoming an economic and environmental necessity to mitigate risk and boost income.
It really is the foundation of building resilience in the sector. Diversification provides resilience against disasters. If one crop fails due to specific weather or a pest attack, others might survive. It saves precious water resources by shifting away from thirsty crops like rice. It improves soil health through crop rotation. It enhances biodiversity conservation. And, as we noted, it directly tackles the nutritional security gap often left by the heavy focus on just rice and wheat. Hashtag Target 3.2, the push for organic farming and millets.
Okay, alongside diversification into different types of crops and activities, the move towards how things are grown, sustainability is also central. India is now apparently a global leader in the sheer number of organic farmers.
That's a significant achievement, yes. The data suggests India ranks #1 globally in the number of individual organic producers. By 2022-23, there were reportedly 68 lakh hectares under organic cultivation. And of course, the state of Sikkim stands out as being recognized as the world's first fully organic state.
What's driving this?
It seems to be a combination of increasing domestic consumer demand, driven by health consciousness, and importantly, the potential for accessing high-premium organic markets internationally. Organic produce often commands a significantly higher price.
Right, but for a farmer looking to tap into those high-value international markets, certification is absolutely everything, isn't it? Our sources highlight a critical distinction between the two main certification mechanisms used in India.
Yes, this distinction is crucial because it effectively determines whether a farmer's produce can be exported to lucrative markets like Europe or North America. There are two main systems. First, there's the Participatory Guarantee Scheme, or PGS.
How does PGS work?
PGS is designed to be more accessible for small farmers. It's often cluster-based, involves peer review among farmers within the group, and has lighter government verification processes. It's quite effective and popular for certifying produce sold in the domestic market within India.
But the catch is?
The catch is that PGS certification is generally not accepted by major trading partners like the European Union. They cite concerns about the rigor and independence of the verification, falling short of their strict sanitary and phytosanitary SPS requirements for imports.
So if you want to export to, say, Europe, you need the other system.
You need the National Program on Organic Production, or NPOP. This is the gold standard, designed to meet international requirements. It involves rigorous, independent third-party inspection agencies, formal audits of farm practices, and usually requires a 3-year transition and verification period before full organic certification is granted.
And NPOP is accepted internationally.
Yes, NPOP certification provides the necessary level of trust and traceability and is generally accepted by importing countries. But this creates a challenging trade-off for many small farmers: the relatively easier domestic access through PGS versus the much more demanding, costly, but potentially far more lucrative export access via NPOP.
What are some of the practical difficulties faced by farmers who do decide to commit to organic farming, regardless of the certification route?
They face several significant hurdles. There's often limited availability and sometimes a high cost associated with certified organic inputs like seeds or biofertilizers, which can squeeze their profit margins.
Yields can be lower initially.
Yes, they often experience yield variability, sometimes lower yields, especially during the transition phase when they're moving away from chemical inputs and rebuilding soil health. A very practical problem is the risk of contamination from nearby conventional farms that might still be using chemical pesticides or fertilizers, which can drift over and potentially nullify their organic status.
And getting advice.
That's another issue. There's often a widespread absence of specialized agricultural extension services that are specifically tailored to provide guidance on organic farming methodologies and troubleshooting. The support system isn't always geared towards organic practices.
Okay, let's pivot slightly to millets, or Sri Anna, as they're being promoted. The UN declaring 2023 as the International Year of Millets really put these ancient grains back in the spotlight, didn't it? And not just for their resilience, but perhaps as a direct solution to some of the problems created by the dominant rice wheat MSP regime.
Millets are almost policy gold in this context.
Yeah.
They offer a suite of benefits. Nutritionally, they are incredibly beneficial for human health. They generally have a low glycemic index, making them good for diabetics. They're gluten-free, rich in micronutrients, directly addressing that nutritional deficit we discussed.
And environmentally.
Their environmental characteristics are almost revolutionary in the Indian context. They are highly drought-resistant, requiring minimal water inputs compared to rice or sugarcane. They can grow well even on relatively poor marginal soils. So by promoting millets, policymakers can directly tackle the severe water pressure created by the prevailing rice-wheat cycle in many regions.
It seems like a win-win. What is the downside?
The major challenge right now seems to be on the demand side. Despite the government push, there's still relatively low consumer awareness and acceptance of millets, in urban diets especially. One report noted that only about 10% of households currently report consuming millets regularly.
So production needs to be matched by demand creation.
Exactly. It requires aggressive marketing campaigns, efforts to integrate millets into popular food products, and importantly, including them more systematically in government-supported diets like the PDS or midday meals to create sustained demand. Hashtag tag 3.3, confronting climate volatility.
Let's turn now to perhaps the single greatest long-term threat looming over the entire sector: climate volatility. We've touched on it, but Indian agriculture's heavy reliance on the monsoon makes it extremely vulnerable, doesn't it?
The sheer scale of the vulnerability is quite alarming. Our sources consistently state that around 2/3 of India's agricultural land faces a high risk of drought. And as we noted, irrigation coverage is still low overall, only 55% of the net sown area.
And rainfall patterns are becoming more erratic.
Definitely. We're witnessing an increasing frequency of dry spells within the monsoon season itself. One study indicated that the frequency of these damaging dry spells jumped by a staggering 127% during the period 1981-2011 compared to the earlier historical period of 1951-1980. This instability in rainfall is directly correlated with crop losses and economic distress for farmers.
And the future projections, considering rising temperatures, suggest a potential sharp drop in overall agricultural output, even independent of rainfall changes.
Yes, the modeling projections are quite stark. A global average temperature rise of just 2 degrees C, which is unfortunately well within current climate trajectories and moderate mitigation scenarios, is projected by some studies to cause overall agricultural productivity in India to drop by somewhere between 8% and 12%.
Is it heat or lack of water that's the bigger projected threat?
The research seems to indicate that the damage caused by heat stress and water scarcity, dry spells, droughts, heat waves, tends to negatively impact agricultural output far more severely and widely than losses from excess water events like floods or from cold waves. The primary stress factors seem to be related to heat and water availability.
Now, to try and measure the sector's overall resilience and readiness for these kinds of shocks, we have something called the ICAR Composite Index of Agricultural Sustainability. What does this index reveal about the national picture?
Yes, the Indian Council of Agricultural Research, ICAR, developed this index, and it provides a critical benchmark. The index runs on a scale from 0, representing highly unsustainable practices, to 1, representing fully sustainable agriculture. The all-India average score, based on the data we reviewed, is currently around 0.49.
0.49, so basically halfway there.
Essentially, yes. It indicates a moderate, borderline level of sustainability across the country as a whole. There's significant variation between states, of course.
Which states are leading?
States like Mizoram in the northeast, Kerala in the south, and Madhya Pradesh in central India tend to score higher. This is often attributed to factors like better water management practices, higher levels of crop diversification, and more integrated ecosystem management approaches.
And the lowest performers.
Conversely, arid states like Rajasthan tend to rank lowest, primarily due to water scarcity challenges. But critically, the index also highlights that even the highly productive regions, like the Indo-Gangetic Plains India's breadbasket, face significant sustainability risks, particularly related to the severe groundwater depletion caused by intensive rice wheat cultivation. So even high productivity doesn't automatically mean high sustainability.
Okay, we've established the enormous scale of the problems facing the sector from economics to environment. Now let's explore technology, which is often viewed as the necessary tool, maybe the accelerator, needed to leapfrog some of these decades-old inefficiencies. The foundation of this technological shift seems to be the concept of precision farming.
Yes, precision farming represents a fundamental shift away from the traditional, often uniform one-size-fits-all approach to managing crops across a whole field or region.
How does it work?
It's essentially a data-driven, site-specific management strategy. The core mantra, or idea, is applying the right input, whether that's water, fertilizer, or pesticide, at the right place, at the right time, and in the right amount. It's about hyperlocal optimization.
Minimizing waste and maximizing efficiency.
Exactly. It minimizes input waste, conserves precious resources like water, and aims to maximize yield potential by tailoring interventions to the specific needs of small patches of land, sometimes down to the individual plant level.
Now, the government's large-scale roadmap for enabling this kind of shift seems centered on the Digital Agriculture Mission, or DAM, and particularly the creation of something called the AgriStack. What are the critical foundational pillars of this digital infrastructure?
AgriStack is really seen as the non-negotiable prerequisite for enabling precision farming at a national scale. It's conceived as an integrated set of core digital registries.
What are they?
First, there's the Farmers Registry. The goal here is to assign every farmer in the country a unique, trusted digital identity, linked perhaps to their Aadhaar number. Second, the Village Land Maps Registry. This aims to create accurate, digitized maps of all agricultural land plots and link them securely to the farmer's digital ID, establishing clear, authenticated land records.
So who owns what, digitally verified?
Precisely. And third, the Crop Zone Registry. This involves using modern tools like digital surveys, potentially leveraging satellite imagery or even drone data to know exactly what crop is planted, where it's planted, and when, all recorded in real time. Together, these three registries create a secure, verifiable digital asset profile for every farmer and every field.
Okay, so you have this massive database, but the raw data itself isn't useful to a farmer unless it's converted into actionable advice, right? How does that happen?
That's the role of the next layer, often termed the Krishi Decision Support System, or KDSS. Think of KDSS as the analytical engine or the intelligence layer built on top of the AgriStack foundation.
What does it do?
KDSS integrates all the data from the AgriStack, the farmer identity, the land record, the crop data, with external information sources. This includes things like high-resolution remote sensing data from satellites, which can monitor crop health, soil moisture, etc., and detailed meteorological data for weather forecasting.
And it provides recommendations.
Yes. By analyzing all this integrated data, KDSS aims to provide personalized, real-time information and advisories directly to the farmer. This could be about potential pest outbreaks in their specific area, optimal irrigation schedules based on weather forecasts and soil conditions, or nutrient deficiency warnings based on satellite imagery. It shifts farming advice from generalized pamphlets to hyper-local, actionable recommendations, potentially delivered via smartphone apps.
A very visible and tangible example of this kind of technological shift in action is the deployment of drones in agriculture. We hear about initiatives like the NAMO drone DD scheme promoting this. What is the expected, say, fourfold impact of using drones?
Drones are really interesting because they seem to be solving several crucial problems simultaneously, including potentially alleviating the growing issue of rural labor shortages for certain farm tasks.
Oh.
The impact is often described as fourfold.
Okay, what are they?
First, enhanced profitability for the farmer, primarily by reducing input waste through precise application. Second, potentially increased yield through more timely monitoring and intervention against pests or diseases. Third, reduced cultivation costs due to more efficient application of things like pesticides or fertilizers compared to manual methods. And fourth, significant resource conservation, particularly water and chemicals.
What are the specific use cases? How are they being used?
They're being used across the crop cycle, for precision seeding or planting in some cases, for monitoring crop canopy health using specialized cameras like infrared to detect stress early, for highly targeted pesticide or liquid fertilizer spraying, reaching only the affected areas, and even for analyzing soil moisture levels to optimize irrigation management. They offer a really versatile platform, especially becoming viable on larger farms now, for instance, in states like Tamil Nadu, where adoption is growing.
Crucially, this whole digital transformation, the AgriStack, the KDSS, the data from drones, isn't just about farming practices. It's also starting to unlock better access to formal financial services in rural areas, isn't it?
That financial linkage is absolutely vital. The rich data collected through these digital systems about the farmer, their land, their crop performance, their adoption of good practices feeds directly into the financial ecosystem, helping to de-risk lending to farmers.
How is that manifesting?
We see two major initiatives highlighted in our sources. First is the Kisan Rin portal. This is an online platform aiming to digitize the entire process for accessing short-term agricultural loans, like the Kisan Credit Card, KCC scheme. From application through land record verification to sanction and disbursement, the goal is to make it seamless, reduce manual paperwork, potential corruption, and fragmentation across different banks. It speeds up access to critical working capital.
Okay, so streamlining existing credit. What's the second initiative? It seems to address the fundamental problem of how banks assess farmer risk.
Exactly. The development of a new Grameen credit score framework, particularly being pioneered by public sector banks, PSBs. This aims to provide a much more sophisticated and holistic risk assessment for individuals in rural areas.
Moving beyond just land ownership or past loan history.
Yes. Instead of relying solely on traditional, often incomplete, formal financial records, this framework aims to integrate alternative data points. Things like prompt repayment of utility bills, participation history in government schemes, evidence of successful farming outcomes, perhaps monitored digitally via the AgriStack. All this can contribute to building a more accurate credit profile. The hope is this will spur credit demand, improve loan terms for reliable farmers, and potentially benefit participants in programs like the Lakpati Didi scheme by validating their creditworthiness. Hashtag 4.2, the international dimension. WTO and subsidies.
Yeah, this entire domestic policy structure we've been discussing, especially the minimum support price, MSP, and various input subsidies for things like fertilizer or power, operates under the constant heavy shadow of global trade rules, specifically the World Trade Organization's Agreement on Agriculture. India finds itself constantly having to defend its subsidy regime on the global stage.
It's a perpetual geopolitical headache, absolutely. To understand the conflict, you really need to get a handle on the WTO's traffic light system for classifying agricultural subsidies.
Okay, can you break that down?
Broadly, we distinguish between direct subsidies, like direct income support payments, think PM Kisan again, which are generally decoupled from production, and most indirect subsidies. Indirect subsidies include things like government spending on R&D, extension services, pest control programs, or even concessional loans and tax exemptions for farmers. Most of these generally fall under the WTO's Green Box.
Green Box means okay.
Yes, Green Box subsidies are considered minimally trade distorting or non-trade distorting. Therefore, they face no spending limits under WTO rules. Countries can spend as much as they want on Green Box measures.
The controversy then, the area of constant dispute, must be the subsidies that fall into the Amber Box.
That's precisely where the trouble lies for India. The Amber Box contains subsidies that are considered to distort trade and production decisions. These are subject to strict limits. For developing countries like India, the limit is called the de minimis level, meaning the total value of these Amber Box subsidies cannot exceed 10% of the total value of the country's agricultural production for a specific product, or 10% of total agricultural output for non-product specific support.
And which Indian subsidies fall into this problematic Amber Box?
Primarily, India's MSP regime, The price support part and certain input subsidies, especially those for fertilizer, irrigation, power, and seeds, are classified as amber box support. Our sources consistently highlight that India's calculation for market price support, MPS for rice in particular, repeatedly breaches this 10% de minimis limit, according to the WTO's calculation methods.
Leading to challenges from other countries.
Yes, leading to formal questions and potential disputes being raised by competitor agricultural exporting countries at the WTO.
But why does the WTO accounting methods seem to inflate India's subsidy value so dramatically, causing this constant breach? This seems to be a major point of contention.
This is absolutely the crux of India's long-standing argument at the WTO. The organization's accounting methodology for calculating market price support uses an incredibly outdated external reference price, ERP. This is the international market price against which the domestic administered price, like MSP, is compared to calculate the subsidy component.
And the benchmark year is very old.
Extremely old. The ERP for commodities like rice is benchmarked way back to the average international prices prevailing during 1986-88. Think about the scale of that distortion. They are comparing today's minimum support price, set in current rupees, with a global benchmark price from over 35 years ago, converted at historical exchange rates.
So because that old reference price is so low...
Exactly. Because the 1986-88 ERP is so low in nominal terms, it artificially inflates the calculated gap between India's current MSP and that historical benchmark. This makes it appear that India is providing massive trade-distorting subsidies, even if the actual support level relative to current international prices might be much lower. It's a calculation methodology issue at its core.
That puts India in a very difficult defensive position, doesn't it? Especially since these subsidies are considered crucial domestically for food security and farmer livelihoods. How does the government typically counter this external pressure to reduce farmer support?
India employs a combination of strategic diplomatic tools and arguments. Firstly, it invokes the Peace Clause. This was a temporary mechanism agreed upon by WTO members back in Bali in 2013. It essentially provides legal protection, preventing other countries from initiating disputes against a developing country's food security procurements, like MSP for buffer stocks, even if they breach the amber box limits, provided certain conditions are met.
Like transparency.
Yes, conditions like submitting detailed notifications about the programs and ensuring they don't distort trade excessively beyond food security needs. It's a temporary shield. Secondly, India consistently argues for special and differential treatment, S&DT. It emphasizes that for a large developing country with immense challenges related to food security, poverty reduction, and protecting vulnerable smallholder farmers, its domestic support policies must be prioritized over strict adherence to trade liberalization principles designed for developed agricultural exporters. It frames it as a development imperative.
Yet, even if these subsidies can be justified internationally using these arguments, our sources also point out that large-scale input subsidies in particular can have significant negative consequences domestically, regardless of the WTO rules.
Yes, we absolutely must acknowledge the domestic downsides, particularly concerning resource misallocation. Subsidies, especially input subsidies, often lead to what economists call deadweight loss. This is an economic welfare loss to society caused by inefficient production decisions, like overapplication of fertilizers or excessive water use because they are artificially cheap.
The classic example being...
The most egregious example often cited is the provision of free or heavily subsidized electricity for agricultural irrigation pumps, particularly in states like Punjab and Haryana. While intended to help farmers, this has directly led to the severe overextraction and alarming depletion of groundwater resources. It's a classic case of resource inefficiency masked by a subsidy, creating a huge long-term environmental and economic liability. This also represents a massive fiscal drain, both direct fiscal burden on state budgets and quasi-fiscal burden on power distribution companies, diverting potentially huge sums of money away from more productive long-term investments like agricultural R&D, climate adaptation measures, or rural infrastructure.
So the policy direction should be?
The clear policy direction, albeit gradual, has to be moving away from these distorting, resource-intensive price support mechanisms and input subsidies towards less trade-distorting, more environmentally sound, and better targeted decoupled income support measures, like the PM Kisan model.
Okay, this structural need to move away from supply-driven distortions and resource inefficiency leads us perfectly to what seems like the most visionary, perhaps transformative policy shift discussed in our sources. The idea of moving from the traditional farm-to-fork model to something called the inverse fork-to-farm approach.
Yes, this concept really tries to flip the traditional agricultural policy paradigm on its head. Traditionally, the farm-to-fork model is essentially supply-driven.
That's so.
Farmers, heavily influenced by policies like MSP and long-standing practices, primarily grow what they've always grown or what the government reliably buys, often water-intensive staples like rice and wheat. Then, the rest of the policy system procurement, PDS, market interventions, tries to push these specific commodities onto the consumer's plate, the fork. This model, as we've discussed throughout this deep dive, creates many of the nutritional imbalances and environmental problems we see.
So the inverse fork-to-farm approach, which was strongly advocated by the Dr. Ashok Dalway Committee on Doubling Farmers' Income, starts from the other end. It starts with the consumer.
Exactly. It is fundamentally demand-driven and consumer-centric. The starting point is the fork, meaning the actual dietary needs, nutritional guidelines, and evolving consumer preferences of the population. This demand-side information is then used upstream to actively guide and shape what happens on the farm.
So instead of growing what's easy or historically subsidized, farmers are incentivized to grow what the nation actually needs nutritionally or what the market demands.
Precisely. If public health data clearly shows a widespread need for more protein or certain micronutrients, or if consumer trends show a growing demand for healthier grains or organic produce, then the policy framework should actively encourage and guide farmers' cropping patterns towards meeting that demand, perhaps shifting towards pulses, millets, oilseeds, fruits, and vegetables.
What are the anticipated systemic benefits of making this dramatic conceptual reversal? It sounds logical, but what are the expected outcomes?
The potential benefits are multifaceted and seem to touch upon almost every challenge we've discussed. Firstly, it inherently promotes resource efficiency. By aligning production with actual needs, it would automatically discourage the overproduction of water-guzzling staples in unsuitable regions and naturally favor more climate-resilient and less resource-intensive crops like millets where appropriate. Secondly, it aims to directly improve nutritional health outcomes across the population by diversifying the food basket. Thirdly, it could create greater market transparency and stability for farmers by linking their production decisions more directly to clear, predictable demand signals rather than relying solely on government procurement.
And ultimately, better income for farmers.
That's the hope. By producing crops that meet real market needs or nutritional requirements, farmers should theoretically be able to command better, more sustained prices, leading to less volatile and potentially higher incomes, especially if they transition towards high-value crops.
It's a compelling vision, but how do you actually implement something this revolutionary in practice, moving it beyond just a concept on paper?
Implementation is undoubtedly the challenge, and it requires a concerted, multi-pronged effort focusing on data, policy alignment, and farmer outreach. First, you need to fully operationalize that data infrastructure. We talked about the AgriStack and the KDSS to actually generate and disseminate those granular demand signals effectively to farmers in a usable format.
So the tech backbone is essential.
Absolutely. Second, the government itself needs to lead by example and actively diversify the menus used in its own massive food procurement and distribution schemes. Things like PMPO-SHAN, the midday meal scheme, and the PDS itself need to systematically include more millets, pulses, and fortified foods, thereby creating large-scale, guaranteed institutional demand for these diversified crops.
Walking the talk, essentially.
Exactly. And finally, strengthening the agricultural extension services, particularly through the network of Krishi Vigyan Kendras, KVKs, or farm science centers, is absolutely essential. These KVKs need to be equipped and mandated to educate farmers about these new, demand-driven cropping patterns, train them in the specific agronomic practices required for these alternative crops, and connect them with the markets and technologies needed to succeed in this new paradigm. It requires a significant reorientation of the support system.
We have covered an immense amount of ground in this deep dive. We've analyzed the really deep structural issues plaguing Indian agriculture, haven't we? From the complex political economics of MSP and agrarian distress.
Right through to the existential threats posed by climate volatility and the intricate complexities of navigating global trade rules at the WTO.
So the key takeaway for you, the listener, I think, is that the sector is currently navigating a phase of incredibly rapid and simultaneous transition on multiple fronts.
That's right. It's simultaneously trying to fight the immediate economic distress of the farmer, using tools like direct income support schemes. At the same time, it's working to modernize a vast, historically leak-prone food security system using digital tools like ENWRs and the hub-and-spoke silo model.
And looking to the future.
And urgently preparing for the future by prioritizing investment in those high-growth allied sectors like fisheries and livestock, and adopting precision technologies like drones and data analytics to boost efficiency and sustainability.
It seems the ultimate success really relies on integrating all these diverse interventions under a unified vision. You hear terms like the Beej the Bazaar talk, approach seed to market.
Yes, connecting the dots is crucial. Linking data-driven technology like the AgriStack to accessible financial schemes like the Kisan credit card and actively pushing farmers towards the demonstrably higher profitability found in areas like horticulture and livestock.
Precisely. And if we connect this right back to that initial tension we started with, the numbers really are striking. Our sources show that while 52% of agricultural households are currently burdened by debt,
Yet these emerging high-value sectors like horticulture can offer returns that are potentially up to 10 times greater than traditional staple crops.
so here's a provocative final thought for you to consider, building on everything we've discussed. The ultimate test of India's agricultural transformation may not, therefore, rest simply on whether it can tweak the MSP price floor by a few percentage points or marginally increase input subsidies.
Perhaps the real measure of success lies in whether the entire policy framework, the technology, the finance, the extension services, the market linkages, can successfully enable and empower the average smallholder farmer to transition. To transition from being primarily a staple crop producer facing crippling debt and environmental volatility.
To becoming a more resilient, market-linked entrepreneur, actively benefiting from the opportunities in high-growth allied sectors and empowered by high-tech, resource-efficient tools. That fundamental shift in identity, operation, and outcome for millions of farmers, that might be the true measure of success for this ongoing transformation.